The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to them, "I do will it, be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the 1850s, there was a leper colony on the island of Molokai, part of the Hawaiian Islands. People who were found with leprosy on the main island of Hawaii were put into cages, shipped off to Molokai, and literally dumped in the ocean near the island. There were no medicines, no doctors, no shelters, no blankets, nothing but the hot sun during the day and the cold wind during the night. The Catholic bishop of the Hawaiian island knew that there were about 10 Catholics among the 200 to 300 lepers on Molokai. There was a young priest from Europe named Damien de Vester who had been a carpenter before he became a Catholic priest. The bishop asked Father Damien to go to the leper colony and put together a prefabricated chapel that had already been shipped to the island. Father Damien was instructed to have no contact with the lepers, no anointing, no confessions, and no burial, because the bishop did not have many priests and did not want to lose a young zealous priest, as was Father Damien. But conquering his fears, Father Damien became the first non-leper to stay overnight on the island. He immediately began building shelters for the people. He constructed the church and began saying Mass each day. He was surprised to find over 100 people wanting to pray with him, even though only 10 of them were Catholic. He was the first to show Christ's love to them in deeds rather than words. A boat came to pick up Father Damien after his 30-day medical visa expired, but Father Damien refused to go. He built a water system, planted over 1,000 trees to protect the people from the scorching sun, and continued saying Mass daily for the people. Lepers of all faiths and no faith went to his Masses. They said, "He holds our hands when we die." In the end, Father Damien himself developed leprosy. Towards the end of his life, Mother Mary Ann and a group of her sisters joined him on the island and continued his work. On a little hill in Molokai, there is a cross with 3 words from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians that sum up what was at the heart of Father Damien's work. The words are, "Love never fails." And that Father Damien, just a few years ago, was canonized a saint. So now he's Saint Father Damien. How many of you were aware of that? I tell you, you watch too much ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. Goodness gracious. Today's gospel, we have Jesus healing a leprous man. And what's interesting, if you go to Luke's gospel in chapter 5 and Matthew in chapter 8 of his gospel, you'll find the same story recounted to the exact detail. And then Luke also gives us another healing story of lepers, the story with which we're all familiar. We hear it on Thanksgiving Day in this church, of Jesus being encountered by 10 lepers. He heals them all, but only one comes back to say thank you. So what's the big deal about leprosy? It was such an important issue for the Jewish people that the book of Leviticus, one of the 5 great books of the Old Testament, devoted 2 entire chapters, chapters 13 and 14, to talking about leprosy and how it was to be dealt with by the community. And here's basically what it said. First of all, leprosy back then was not necessarily what we call leprosy today. Today we call it Hansen's disease, and it actually can be treated. You won't find it really in the United States. It's found more in tropical climates. India, there's a lot of cases of leprosy there today, according to our missionaries that work among the lepers in India. Back then, however, pretty much any skin affliction could have been identified as leprosy. For instance, if you had eczema or psoriasis, and believe it or not, even a bad case of acne would have been identified as leprosy. If you had a cut, let's say, on your arm from doing farming, and the cut had a difficult time healing over, and it was scabbed over badly, somebody could point to that and say, leper. You would have to go before one of the temple priests who would verify this charge, and then he would send you off literally into no man's land. Lepers were not allowed to live with their families. In fact, they could live with no one who was considered clean, non-leprous. So there they were out in the desert, out in the wilderness, wherever they were. Sometimes they lived in caves. Usually they lived in bands together. And it was a horrible existence. For one thing, many of the people suspected the reason you would be afflicted with leprosy is because you've committed some sin. And so God's simply punishing you for that sin. Or the sin of some ancestor who may be dead. So you were actually among the living dead back then. And you had to walk around. If you walked around, you had to cover your mouth if you saw someone coming towards you who was non-leprous. You covered your mouth and you shouted to the top of your lungs, unclean, unclean, lest you come into any contact with them. And if you were non-leprous and you even brushed against a leper, you then were considered unclean. So it was a horribly frightening disease for ancient people who did not have the advances of modern medicine, but it is an incredibly lonely experience for the leper who had to suffer it all. And so, it's amazing, as this story opens up from St. Mark, we're told that a leper comes towards Jesus. He kneels down right before him, and right away he has violated the law. He is too close to Jesus. He should have never gotten that close. But notice what the Lord does. He violates the law. The man pleads to him and says, if you will it, you can make me clean. Evidently, he's heard enough about Jesus' healing power that he knows what Jesus could do, and he's desperate. Jesus simply looks at him and says, I do will it. Be made clean. And then, are you ready for this? Jesus breaks the law. He reaches out and touches the man, and the man is made clean instantly. And then Jesus does something interesting. First of all, it's obvious that he has respect for the Jewish law. He would even say in Matthew's gospel, I have not come to abolish the law. So he tells this now clean leper to go to the temple precincts, show yourself to one of the priests so you can verify this, and then pay the dues required according to the law of Moses. But he also warns him, as we've heard many times now, every Sunday for the past several weeks, to tell no one about what has happened. And what happens? What everyone else did who was told by Jesus to say nothing. He goes off and proclaims the good news to everybody. And now, notice what happens, a detail that's often overlooked at the end of this gospel. This man, thanks to Jesus' mercy, is now free to go wherever he wishes. Jesus, on the other hand, becomes the leper. Because of the throngs of people who just want to see him, he has to go off for a deserted place so that he can breathe, for goodness sake. So the one who was once a slave and made free by Jesus has now turned Jesus into someone who's not free to move around. Interesting, huh? But Jesus was willing to put himself at that risk. What's the point here for us? Certainly, we must pray for lepers. It is a hideous disease, for sure. But there's another kind of leprosy that occurs in this life. Social leprosy or spiritual leprosy. I've shared with you before one of the amazing things about being a Catholic priest, and one of the joys of being a Catholic priest is the time that I spend in that little room over there called the confessional. Throughout my years as a Catholic priest, I had been at first shocked, but it seems now nothing shocks me, but certainly amazed when it happens these days. To have someone come into that room during the season of Advent, during the season of Lent most especially, and sometimes throughout the year, to say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, recently 35 years, 40 years, and one time 72 years since my last confession." Makes you wonder initially, where you been? Where you been all these years? But you know, my brothers and sisters, sometimes people do things that make them feel leprous inside. They feel that the Lord would never accept them, that they don't have a place in the church, and so they stay away, far, far away at times. What an incredible experience it is as a priest to watch these people be set free. What an amazing experience. And you know what? Always, always, they come alive. You see, I know what that leper felt who was touched by Jesus, because I've seen that happen to people in that little room. So my brothers and sisters, the message for us is we have to be people who reach out to those who are out there in the periphery. And there are many of them, many people who simply don't feel worthy to come into this church. Whether they're Catholic or not, they feel that they are unworthy to be a part of a community of faith. It could be because of something they've done in the past or some misconception they have about their lives, and often it's that. But the bottom line is they need to know that the Jesus does not want them out there. He wants them in here. And so what Jesus did as his disciples today, we are called to do. We are called to reach out and maybe not necessarily touch the spiritual lepers, but pray for them and welcome them back. Can you imagine coming and sitting in a pew here in this church where we all sit comfy and cozy all the time, week after week, not knowing what to do next, what to say next, whether to kneel, whether to stand? What do you do? You and I, we can make a difference. We can make them feel whole. I'd like to close with a touching little story I found this week. A man by the name of Bob Constantine tells of the time he accompanied an infant Vietnamese orphan to the United States so she could be adopted after the Vietnam War. In the long flight to the U.S., the baby's eyes overflowed with tears, but she made absolutely no sound. Constantine found the stewardess and asked her what she thought the problem might be. The stewardess had seen war orphans before and was quick to tell Bob that this was normal. As she said, the reason they don't make a noise when they cry is because they learned long ago nobody would come to them. We need to let people know that they don't have to be locked out. We are here for them. We are the presence of Christ. So my brothers and sisters, let's not just pray for them, but let us reach out and bring them to the Lord and his church.